November 3rd, 1980. Johnny Carson was 12 minutes into a light-hearted interview with Jack Lemmon, laughing at impressions, trading stories about Billy Wilder, when Lemmon suddenly stopped smiling and said 7 words that changed everything. "Johnny, I need to tell you something." What followed wasn't comedy, it wasn't entertainment. It was one of Hollywood's most beloved actors revealing on live television that he had cancer. And what Johnny did next, how he responded, what he said, how he held his friend together in front of 20 million viewers, became the most emotional moment in Tonight Show history. The Tonight Show was humming along perfectly that Monday night. Jack Lemmon, 55 years old, fresh off critical acclaim for The China Syndrome, one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, was in the middle of his usual routine. Impressions, stories about Walter Matthau, behind-the-scenes tales from Some Like It Hot. The studio audience was eating it up. Johnny was in his element, feeding Jack perfect straight lines. Everything was going exactly as planned. But 12 minutes in, Johnny noticed something. Jack's smile faltered. The legendary actor, known for his ability to switch effortlessly between comedy and drama, suddenly looked vulnerable in a way audiences had never seen. "Johnny," Jack said, his voice quieter now, "before we talk about the new film, I need to tell you something, and I need to tell America something." The studio audience sensed the shift and went quiet. Johnny leaned forward, his entertainer's instincts immediately recognizing that something important was about to happen. "Of course, Jack," Johnny said gently. "Whatever you need to say." Jack took a deep breath, looked at the camera, then back at Johnny. "I went to the doctor last Tuesday for what I thought was a routine checkup. I'd been feeling tired, having some pain I couldn't explain, figured it was just age catching up with me." Johnny's face showed genuine concern. "What did they find, Jack?" Jack's voice was quiet but clear. "They found cancer, colon cancer, stage 2. For a brief moment, Johnny Carson sat completely still. Then, without hesitation, he did something that demonstrated why he was more than just a talk show host. He stood up, walked over to where Jack was sitting, and placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. "Jack," Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion, "first of all, thank you for trusting us with this. I know that couldn't have been easy to say out loud, especially in front of millions of people." "I wanted to say it here," Jack replied, "because this show has always felt like talking to friends, and if I was going to tell people, I wanted to tell them somewhere that felt safe." Before we go deeper into what happened next, how this conversation opened a door that changed how America talked about cancer, if you're here because you remember when Johnny Carson could turn entertainment into humanity, subscribe to Johnny Carson Legacy Stories. We're uncovering the moments when Johnny stopped being a host and became the friend everyone needed. Hit that bell. Johnny returned to his seat, but the tone had completely transformed. The audience sat in respectful silence, understanding they were witnessing something far more important than entertainment. "Can you tell us what happens next?" Johnny asked, "if you're comfortable talking about it." Jack nodded. "I have surgery scheduled for next Monday. They're going to remove the tumor and check if it's spread to the lymph nodes. The doctors are optimistic because they caught it relatively early, but there's no guarantee with cancer. There's never a guarantee." "Are you scared?" Johnny asked, the kind of direct, honest question few interviewers would risk in such a moment. "Terrified," Jack admitted without hesitation. "I've played a lot of characters dealing with crisis, but this is real life, and it's different when you're not acting. I have a wife, children, friends, people I'm not ready to leave yet, and there's still so much work I want to do." Johnny leaned forward, his famous quick wit completely set aside. "You're going to beat this, Jack. You're one of the strongest people I know, and you have the best medical care in the world. But I also want you to know that whatever you need, support, distraction, someone to talk to at 3 a.m. when you're worried, I'm here. We're all here." What happened next caught everyone off guard. An audience member, a middle-aged woman in the third row, raised her hand and called out to the stage, "Mr. Lemmon, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I need to ask you something." Security started to move toward her, but Johnny held up his hand. "It's okay," he said. "Go ahead." The woman's voice was shaking. "My husband was diagnosed with cancer 6 months ago, and he's been so scared that he won't talk about it with anyone." How did you find the courage to tell people? How do you deal with the fear? Jack Lemmon looked at her with deep compassion. You deal with it by not dealing with it alone, he said. That's why I'm talking about it now. I spent the last 5 days keeping this secret, trying to be strong, trying to pretend everything was fine, and it was killing me almost as much as the cancer might. He paused. So I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. Johnny made a decision in that moment that would change the rest of the show. He signaled to Fred de Cordova to extend the segment and asked the audience, is there anyone else here who's been affected by cancer, either personally or someone you love? Nearly a quarter of the audience raised their hands. For the next 15 minutes, The Tonight Show became something it had never been before, a support group, a forum for honest conversation about fear and mortality, a demonstration of what community could look like in the face of crisis. Johnny facilitated a conversation between Jack and several audience members who shared their stories. A young woman talked about losing her mother to breast cancer. An older man described his own successful battle with prostate cancer. A teenage girl asked Jack how to support her father who was going through chemotherapy. Jack answered each question with honesty and compassion, sometimes through tears, sometimes with the gallows humor that people facing serious illness often develop. And Johnny Carson, the master of timing and comedy, knew exactly when to speak and when to simply let the moment breathe. You know what I'm realizing as we talk about this? Jack said at one point. Cancer doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor, famous or unknown, young or old, and that's terrifying. But it's also weirdly comforting, because it means we're all in this together. If you're feeling the weight of this conversation, the courage it took for Jack to be vulnerable, the grace Johnny showed in holding space for truth, you're exactly where we want you. That's what Johnny Carson Legacy Stories is about. The moments when television stopped performing and started healing. Subscribe now, because these truths matter more than any punchline. As the segment drew to a close, Johnny made a promise to Jack Lemmon that he would keep for the rest of Lemmon's life. Jack, I want you to know that you're not going through this alone, Johnny said. I'm going to check in on you every week, not as a talk show host, but as your friend. And when you're ready, when you've beaten this thing, I want you back on this show to tell America how you did it. Jack smiled through his tears. It's a deal, Johnny. And thank you. Not just for letting me talk about this, but for showing people that it's okay to be scared, that it's okay to ask for help. That's what friends are for, Johnny replied simply. The moment The Tonight Show ended, NBC's switchboard was flooded. But unlike typical viewer responses, these weren't about entertainment or comedy. People were calling to share their own cancer stories, to thank Jack for his bravery, to ask how they could support cancer research. The American Cancer Society reported receiving more calls in the 24 hours following that broadcast than they had in the entire previous month. People who had been hiding their diagnoses from family and friends found the courage to speak openly. Families who had been avoiding difficult conversations finally started talking. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, an oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, later said, "What Jack Lemmon did that night probably saved lives. Early detection is crucial for cancer treatment." And when he talked openly about his diagnosis on national television, thousands of people who had been putting off checkups suddenly made appointments. What viewers didn't see was the extent of Johnny Carson's private support for Jack during his treatment. True to his word, Johnny called Jack every week, sometimes more often. He visited Jack in the hospital after his surgery, bringing books and jokes and normalcy to sterile hospital rooms. When Jack went through chemotherapy and couldn't work, Johnny quietly made sure Jack's family had everything they needed. When Jack felt strong enough for visitors but too weak to go out, Johnny would bring dinner to his house and they'd watch old movies together. "Johnny never made me feel like I was sick," Jack later said. "He made me feel like I was still Jack." 4 months later, in March 1981, Jack Lemmon returned to The Tonight Show. The surgery had been successful. The cancer had been caught before it spread significantly. Jack was in remission. When Johnny introduced him, the studio audience gave Jack a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Jack walked onto the stage looking thinner, but healthy. The first thing he did was hug Johnny Carson. "Well," Johnny said when they finally sat down, "you kept your promise." "I told you I'd beat it," Jack replied with his characteristic smile. "Though I'll admit, there were moments when I wasn't sure I would." "What got you through those moments?" Johnny asked. "Honestly, this conversation we had in November," Jack said. "Knowing that I had talked about it openly, that I had made a kind of promise to all those people watching to fight this thing. It gave me something to hold on to when things got scary." Jack also revealed something else during that return appearance: the number of letters he'd received from people dealing with cancer and how those connections had helped him through his treatment. "I got thousands of letters," Jack said, "from people going through chemo, from families supporting loved ones with cancer, from survivors who wanted to share their stories, and reading those letters reminded me that I wasn't alone. None of us are alone." Jack Lemmon lived for another 21 years after that diagnosis. He continued working, won another Academy Award nomination, made films that became classics. When he passed away in 2001, it was from complications related to bladder cancer, a different cancer that developed years later. But he always credited his successful battle with colon cancer to early detection and the support system that Conversation on The Tonight Show had helped create. In his autobiography, published posthumously, Jack devoted an entire chapter to that November night. "Johnny Carson gave me permission to be vulnerable," Jack wrote. "In a world where men especially are taught to be strong and stoic, Johnny showed me, and millions of others, that there's strength in admitting you're scared. That conversation saved my life in more ways than one." The night Jack Lemmon revealed his cancer diagnosis on The Tonight Show became a watershed moment in how Americans talked about serious illness. Prior to that conversation, cancer was often discussed in whispers, if it was discussed at all. People hid their diagnoses, suffered in silence, faced their fears alone. But Jack's openness, combined with Johnny's compassionate response, helped begin changing that culture. Other celebrities started talking more openly about their health challenges. Families found it easier to have difficult conversations. The stigma that had surrounded cancer began slowly to diminish. Cancer support organizations credit that Tonight Show episode as a turning point in public awareness and fundraising. The visibility Jack brought to the disease and the normalcy with which Johnny treated the conversation made cancer something that could be discussed openly rather than hidden in shame. Years later, when asked about the most important moment of his Tonight Show career, Johnny always mentioned Jack Lemmon's cancer revelation. "I did thousands of interviews over 30 years, Johnny said in a 1999 interview. "I talked to presidents and movie stars and comedians and everyone in between. But the most important conversation I ever had was with Jack that November night, because it wasn't about entertainment. It was about life and death and friendship and courage." Today, when oncologists and cancer counselors train people in how to support loved ones with cancer diagnoses, they often use footage from that Tonight Show episode as an example of what compassionate support looks like. Letting someone be vulnerable, asking honest questions, creating space for authentic emotion, simply being present for someone who's scared. Johnny Carson stopped The Tonight Show that night, not because something went wrong, but because something deeply right was happening. A friend needed support, and he provided it. In doing so, he showed millions of Americans that the most important thing we can do for people facing serious illness is simply be there, with honesty, compassion, and unwavering friendship. On November 3, 1980, Jack Lemmon walked onto The Tonight Show to promote a movie. He left having started a conversation that would save lives, and Johnny Carson proved that sometimes the best thing a host can do is stop hosting and start being human. Jack Lemmon lived 21 more years because he caught his cancer early, and thousands of other people caught theirs early too, because Jack had the courage to speak and Johnny had the wisdom to listen. That's what friends do. That's what heroes do. They show up when it matters most. If this story moved you, if Jack's courage and Johnny's compassion reminded you of what real friendship looks like, subscribe to Johnny Carson Legacy Stories right now. Hit that like button. Share this with someone facing health challenges and let them know they're not alone. And if you've been putting off that doctor's appointment, let Jack Lemmon's story inspire you to take care of yourself. Because early detection saves lives. And conversations like this one remind us that we're never alone in the fight. Johnny Carson and Jack Lemmon proved that on November 3, 1980, and their message still echoes today. It's okay to be scared, it's okay to ask for help, and it's always okay to tell the truth.